From the beginning of time, man has sought devices which would ease life's burdens. We progressed from power provided by people, by animals, and by water, to power provided by machines. Man's principal mechanical power source evolved over the years from the earliest steam engines to the four-stroke internal combustion gasoline engine invented by Nicholas Otto over a century ago. Ever since those early Otto engines enabled us to utilize the energy locked in hydrocarbon fuels, the quest has been to improve, to refine, to be more efficient. This is the story of one result of that search. When a sudden and unexpected oil shortage forced the United States to seriously consider fuel economy for the first time, the word diesel penetrated the consciousness of passenger car drivers. But the diesel engine is not new. It has been with us since before the turn of the century. For all practical purposes, it has been with us as long as the automobile itself. And in the years since its development, the diesel engine has come to power the overwhelming majority of the large commercial vehicles that serve our daily needs. In fact, there is no economical alternative to the diesel engine in commercial vehicles, and will not be for a long time to come. It is only when the diesel engine was placed under the hood of the family car that passenger car drivers began to ask questions. What is a diesel engine? What does it do? Where does it come from? To find the answers, let's go back in time. Back to the Paris Exposition of 1889. This great fair is best remembered for its unveiling of the Eiffel Tower. More than 28 million visitors viewed the ungainly structure, a number equal to half the total population of the United States in those days. But most visitors to the fair were less interested in the tower than they were in the great exhibition halls that displayed the true wonders of the day, the inventions that were already reshaping their lives. Some of the exhibits foretold an impact undreamed of by the casual visitor. Among the array of contraptions was one dismissed by the press as being a diabolical invention designed only to make poor horses lose their minds. The day of the horseless carriage was dawning. Yet in the remote corner of the fairgrounds, the first gasoline-driven automobile, invented by German engineer Karl Benz, created hardly a stir. The fair was a landmark for the display of engines, then being hailed as the great liberators of mankind. Two of the many exhibitors were Gottlieb Daimler, son of a German baker, and his associate, Wilhelm Maybach. Among those influenced by the mechanical marvels on display was a young German engineer, Rudolf Diesel. Diesel was at the fair to exhibit his ice-making machines, but as he looked around him at the latest internal combustion engines, a dream began to take shape. A dream of an engine that would utilize fuel more efficiently than any existing gasoline engine. As he wandered among the engines, perhaps Diesel was remembering a simple device he had used as a student. The device had a plunger that compressed the air, heating it until a piece of tinder ignited. This was to become the basic idea behind the combustion process in the diesel engine. Diesel's idea was simple in theory. In contrast to the gasoline engine, which drew in a mixture of fuel and air, compressed it, and then ignited the mixture with a spark, Diesel's engine, patented in 1892, would draw in only air. The air would be highly compressed and thus heated to a point where the air itself would ignite the fuel as it was sprayed into the engine. As in the gasoline engine, power would be produced when the pressure created by the combustion process pushed down on the engine's piston. The diesel process remains the same today. Air is drawn in and compressed. It ignites the fuel sprayed into the engine, and the pressure created pushes the piston. What today's diesel engines have in common with Rudolf Diesel's earliest models is not only the basic operating principle, but the fact that diesel engines are more efficient than gasoline engines. An engine's efficiency is a mathematical measure of how much of the fuel's energy is actually converted to useful work. Early steam engines had an efficiency of only 10 to 15%. Nicholas Otto's gasoline engines were rated at almost 20%, and the first diesels had an efficiency of 25%. Today, diesel engines are 30 to 50% more efficient than their gasoline counterparts, an efficiency made possible through the extremely high compression they utilize. But to withstand the pressures created inside the engine, diesels have to be built stronger than a comparable gasoline engine. As Rudolf Diesel himself said, the diesel engine is not and will never be a cheap engine. It aims to be the best engine and must be constructed with the very highest class of material, with the best tools, and by the most skilled workmen. Within a few short years, Diesel's engine made him a millionaire, but he was not destined to enjoy his newfound wealth. He was as bad a businessman as he was a good engineer, and he suffered from terrible headaches that were to plague him the rest of his life. With the proceeds of his royalties, he built a mansion that almost immediately began to sap his resources that were already dwindling as a result of a series of extremely bad investments. But in spite of his growing physical and financial problems, Diesel's active mind kept thinking of the future and of new ways to use the power plant he had invented. In June of 1910, polar explorer Roald Amundsen left Norway aboard the diesel-driven ship, the Fram. His destination? The South Pole. After Amundsen reached his goal, he was able to report to the engine's inventor, "Diesel motor excellent." Another maritime triumph came in 1912 with the maiden voyage of the Danish cargo vessel Sealandia. When the ship docked in England, the young First Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, called it the most perfect maritime masterpiece of the century. Thomas Edison added to the accolades by calling the diesel engine one of the truly memorable accomplishments of mankind. But by 1913, the tormented diesel could take no more. His headaches were worse than ever, his finances a shambles, and on November 29th, he disappeared from a ship crossing the English Channel, most probably a suicide. When Diesel began work on his engine, the automobile had just been invented, and the tremendous impact of trucks to move goods was still well into the future. Yet in lectures around the world, he showed he understood that the full potential of his engine would not be realized until it was adapted to these new modes of transportation. But just as Diesel improved on the pioneering work of Nicholas Otto, Gottlieb Daimler, and the other early engineers, others now took his engine and sought to refine it. The quest turned to the development of a diesel engine small enough to effectively power the vehicles that would play such an important role in 20th century life. Efforts began to pay off in 1922. When, in Germany, the Benz company installed a diesel engine in a tractor. Experimental trucks from several companies followed, and the European trucking community saw the new engines as the answer to a most serious problem. Virtually all oil was imported, and it was expensive. So an engine that used half as much fuel as a gasoline engine was readily accepted. By the mid-30s, 90% of all trucks in Germany were diesel-powered. And so the question was being asked, if it works in trucks, why not try it in automobiles? Throughout the 1920s and into the early 30s, several European companies experimented with diesel automobiles. Peugeot, Hanomag Henschel, Daimler-Benz, Citroën. But it would take time to make the diesel automobile a reality. In the United States, Plessy Cummins owned a company that manufactured diesels for use in boats. But with the crash of 1929, demand plummeted, and the company was on the verge of bankruptcy. To instill new life in his company, Cummins thought of putting one of his engines in an auto and driving it to the National Auto Show in New York. He used a large Packard limousine, the only car he could think of that his diesel engine would fit, and set off for New York, 800 miles away. Cummins made sure the trip was well publicized, and by the time he arrived, he was already thinking up other ways to focus public attention on him and his engine. In March of 1930, he drove a Packard Roadster over 1,000 miles to Daytona, Florida, and then established the first world record for a diesel-powered car. He entered a diesel in the 1931 Indianapolis 500 and announced that while his car could not hope to win against the gasoline-engined racing cars of the day, it would make history by running the entire 500-mile race non-stop, which it did. America was impressed, but Cummins was not finished. Convinced that he had latched on to more than just a series of circus stunts, he set out to show a skeptical industry that the diesel had a place on American highways and in American automotive history. In 1931, after driving a truck over 3,200 miles from New York to Los Angeles at a total fuel cost of $11.22, he set a truck endurance record of 14,600 non-stop miles on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Cummins had proved his point and saved his company. May 10th, 1932, marked the maiden run of the first commercially used diesel truck in the United States. And soon, trucks with diesel engines were seen on many of the nation's roads and highways. But in spite of the publicity received by Plessy Cummins, the diesel passenger car in America of the 1930s was still an idea well ahead of its time. The diesel engine offered fuel economy, but fuel in the United States was plentiful and cheap. And while some voices cautioned that such would not always be the case, Americans continued to take for granted the abundance of natural resources. The time when the economical use of fuel would become a national necessity was still far in the future. Until then, there would be other uses to which the diesel engine could be put. The 1930s saw the diesel not only on the highways, but also on the rails. Trains such as the sleek Zephyrs of the Burlington line epitomized the power and efficiency of this new power source that would soon make the steam locomotive obsolete. In the skies, the engines powered the ill-fated dirigible Hindenburg, as well as her sister ship, the Graf Zeppelin. The diesels, with their absence of sparks of any kind, were ideally suited for these graceful craft, inflated as they were with the highly flammable hydrogen gas. From stationary engine to power plant for boats, trucks, locomotives, airships. Only the passenger car remained. Up until the mid-1930s, all experiments with diesel engines in automobiles involved putting a diesel engine designed for some other purpose into a vehicle designed for a gasoline engine. The result was a car that ran, and in most cases ran very economically, if not always smoothly. But just as Rudolf Diesel said that his engine must be constructed with the very highest class of material, with the best tools, and by the most skilled workmen, so too was it becoming increasingly evident that a chassis of heavier construction would be necessary. It was time not for stunts, but for a diesel car that would be designed from start to finish as a diesel car. 1936. The Daimler-Benz factory in Stuttgart, Germany. After years of research, after development of an automotive four-cylinder diesel engine, after exhaustive road tests, the Mercedes-Benz 260D was about to become the world's first mass-produced diesel passenger car. It would meet the rigid demands that diesel placed on the chassis. It would save almost 40% in fuel over its gasoline counterpart. And while intended for use as a taxi, it would become a popular passenger car, and some 2,000 would be sold. Today, the Daimler-Benz factory in Sindelfingen, West Germany. In the past 10 years, almost 4 million cars have been produced here. 44% of them have been diesels. The diesel engine is still not a cheap engine. The vehicle still requires sturdier construction. The result is still economical, dependable, durable. The years since 1936 have been years of diesel development in Europe and of very slowly evolving interest in the United States. There were practical reasons for both of these trends. After World War II, few Europeans could afford to buy a car, and fuel economy and long engine life became critically important. The diesel provided both, and thus became the focus of much attention. In the United States, automobile economy and durability were still low on everyone's priority list. American taste ran to big cars, and big cars used up gasoline at an amazing rate. By the 1950s, several European companies were manufacturing diesel cars. And while their share of the automobile market was still relatively small, the number of diesels was increasing. They also began to trickle into the United States. And by the end of the 1960s, over 100,000 American car owners had turned to diesel. The 1970s saw events in the United States finally make the diesel an idea whose time had come. Suddenly, long lines at the gasoline pumps showed Americans that natural resources were not unlimited. Gasoline prices soared, as did the cost of automobiles themselves. American motorists, as their European counterparts had done decades before, became conscious of fuel economy and automobile durability. And they turned in growing numbers to the savings and long life the diesel engine offered. Daimler-Benz has manufactured more than 3 million diesel cars since those first 260Ds rolled off the assembly line in 1936. Rudolf Diesel set out to develop the world's most efficient engine, an engine that would meet the needs of his era. He succeeded, and succeeded so well that today, some 90 years later, his invention is the primary alternative to gasoline engines, and an answer to problems of a complexity perhaps beyond even his dreamer's vision. And what of the future? Undoubtedly, there will be new challenges to conquer. In 1978, this experimental Mercedes-Benz turbocharged diesel sped around a test track near Nardo in the south of Italy. In 12 hours, 9 world and class speed and distance records held by gasoline-powered cars were broken. The car averaged 195.4 miles per hour, a speed comparable to those achieved by methanol-fueled racing cars at Indianapolis. But the diesel-powered C111 also averaged 14.7 miles per gallon, more than 5 times what an Indianapolis car gets at racing speeds. Today, the work begun in a German laboratory almost a century ago continues. New technology, such as turbocharging, has improved the diesel engine's capability and performance. The sluggishness of the past is gone as newer cars are more responsive, have quicker acceleration, and operate easily at high speeds. The engine is still the most efficient internal combustion engine made, offering the driver better miles per gallon in normal driving. And with no spark plugs to change, no carburetor or distributor to adjust, and no electrical ignition wires to short out, the diesel offers a dependability unmatched by gasoline engines. In fact, with proper maintenance, it is not uncommon to have diesel engines go more than 500,000 miles in both commercial vehicles and passenger cars. And still, the research continues, and new chapters are being added to the ongoing quest for the best, most efficient engine possible.